Okay, so welcome everybody to the IHR Digital History Seminar. We are very fortunate to have with us today Dr. Sydney Shep from Victoria University in Wellington, New Zealand. Dr. Shep is a reader in book history, and she is also the printer of the Wa Teata, if I said that correctly for once, press in Wellington. She is here on sabbatical on a research fellowship from the British Academy to work on a project on the printing culture and cultural geography, cultural geography of book printing at the University of Southampton. And today we are delighted to hear her paper on reimagining the 19th century New Zealand printing history. Thank you very much, Sydney.
Entree. We're just ready to start.
You still need the camera?
We haven't.
If you can do the IHR one.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, it wasn't on the list for today.
If you can do the IHR one.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, it wasn't on the list for today. It's for tomorrow, but it hasn't been booked for today.
Oh, weird.
So, should we pause or do we start?
Just start.
Just start? Well, kia ora, welcome, bonjour. Thanks, Melody, seeing her on this side of the water now. And thanks to you all for coming. I have a paper that I will read, but very happy to take questions at the end, so send them up. That's the best part of the show. And we will be dodging technology here. Good, well timed. We will be dodging technology as I flip between different media forms, so bear with me for So, between 1908 and 1911, Henry William Williams, printer and publisher of the Maori language newspaper Te Pipi Whanaroa Te Rao Press, Gisborne, New Zealand, proposed a new approach to te reo orthography. When the Pakeha arrived here in the islands of the ocean, the language of the Maori was heard, but it was not yet the custom to write this language. The English thought it should be written like English, the French thought it should be written like their language. The pronunciation of English and French are different for some of the letters. There was also the problem with the English language. There was more than one way to pronounce some of the letters, and in some cases one letter was pronounced just like another. What a predicament. Well, Williams experimented with a new typography for printed and written Maori that more closely replicated the sounds of the language. Inheriting an engraved block that represented the cultural context of his readers over which the who flies, Te Pipi Whanaroa, he abruptly shifted the masthead into a purely typographic register in 1900, and then redesigned his sonic canvas in 1908. It required some ingenuity, including creating new kerned pairs and retrofitting other letters. You can see the ways in which the individual letters W, which is two B's, and the H are shaved off and then nested together for the WH aspirated sound in Pipi Whanaroa, a process repeated over the display and the body fonts used in the newspaper. And then you've got the curious N with its descending curved tail to evoke the NG sound, but that was a more complicated proposition. Using a single story lowercase g, the bottom of the ball was filed off and then set and printed. However, such innovations came at a price. As Williams explains later in his address to his readers, we have not yet ordered these letters for all of the types in our office. It is too expensive. Now, Henry Williams was well equipped to the task at hand. He came from a distinguished line of Christian missionaries whose colonization of New Zealand was facilitated through Bible translation and the printed word. From first contact, European sailors, whalers, traders, and missionaries used existing word lists from cognate Polynesian languages circulating in manuscript and print. These word hoards relied upon an acute ear to decipher the sounds of an oral language that was richly nuanced and euphonious, and which had regional, if not dialectical, variations. What the ear heard and how that was translated into writing, then printing, tells us much about how pre-existing alphabets and diacritical interventions shaped the colonial linguistic encounter. The difference between long and short vowels, for instance, was signaled by doubling the letters or the use of umlauts. The aspirated f, the WH, where used, was distinguished from the W with a bread or an apostrophe. The NG sound was frequently reduced to a simple G in print. But the existence of many variations was confusing, particularly for South Island tribes, Kaitahu Iwi in particular, whose grammar and vocabulary were and are significantly different. Consequently, in 1820, the Reverend Thomas Kendall, based at the Church Missionary Society station in the Bay of Islands, and compiler of the first printed book in Maori, A Korero no New Zealand, or the New Zealanders' first book, being an attempt to compose some lessons for the instruction of the natives from 1815, traveled to England with two Ngapuhi chiefs, Wanahika and Waikato. His aim was to visit the Oriental linguist Professor Samuel Lee at Cambridge University and consult his professional expertise. The two chiefs, or Rangatira, on the other hand, were equipping themselves for war. Lee's role in the project was to regularize the language, and based on listening to Kendall's two North Island informers, and the fact they're North Island informers is important, standardized the Maori alphabet to 5 vowels, A, E, I, O, U, 8 consonants, H, K, M, N, P, R, T, and W, and added the diphthong, the NG. The result, as you'll see there on the right, a grammar and vocabulary of the New Zealand language. Despite Lee's grammar falling out of favor with the Church Missionary Society shortly thereafter, which has nothing to do with the integrity and everything to do with Kendall's fall from grace, this was the Maori alphabet that printer and missionary William Colenso used when designing new typecases in 1834 for setting and printing the Maori New Testament, as well as the 1840 Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi. But Colenso himself, a fluent speaker of Te Reo, was dissatisfied with the status quo. His lifelong project, Maori Lexicon, was a way of thinking through questions of language, transcription, and culture. By the time of his death in 1899, however, only the letter A had been published. And despite Henry Williams' enthusiasm, his orthographic reforms didn't take off either. It wasn't until the 1980s that, with the establishment of the Maori Language Commission and the development of macronization software for digital typesetting in Te Reo, that the ear and eye of Aotearoa was on the road to linguistic decolonization. So I've opened my talk with the history of the development of written and Maori in a very truncated form, because it's central to our project to investigate how encounters between the digital and the handmade extend typography's expressive possibilities. The scene is Waitiata Press, a Te Wharetau or Waitiata. The cast of characters includes several letterpress printers, font designers, a nanotechnologist, and a 3D printing machine. Between the all of us, digital handmade has emerged as a concept to embrace hybridity and technological continuum, speaking back to devotees of technological disruption and evolutionary progressivism, and using the affordances of new technologies and serendipitous encounters in the analog print shop to reimagine, if not reinvent, 19th century printing history. We shall return to Maori orthography and its discontents in due course. For the moment, let's probe more deeply into what this thing called the digital handmade means in practice. Waitiata Press was established at Victoria University of Wellington in 1862 by my professor, you'll see there Professor D.F. Don Mackenzie. In the best tradition of Anglo-American bibliographic presses, it used vintage printing equipment and type to teach students the intricacies of historic book production and show how to read and describe the forensic evidence embedded in the physical artifact. It also became a center for small press publishing in a period when New Zealand writers were rarely published on shore or their works locally available. Finally, given the type collection consisted primarily of cast-offs from Wellington printing establishments, it provided an opportunity for research into the region's printing history. Today, Waitiata Press boasts the largest collection of printing equipment and industrial realia in the Southern Hemisphere. It embeds hands-on teaching into material culture studies, book history, communication design, and digital history. It hosts a vibrant book art studio that features limited edition creative translations and innovative fine press books, as you'll see here, and a new Chinese scholar studio is the home of the only collection of Chinese classical types or full-form types in New Zealand, and is a focal point for community engagement. Finally, our research portfolio ranges widely across inscriptional cultures like graffiti and tattoo, to the idiosyncrasies of beer labels and ghost signs, and from correspondence networks of 19th century Victorian printers and polymaths to generative art that digitally engagement with the historical record. Whitehaven Press is also the place where we've been exploring the materiality of language. Language sits at the heart of culture. Written, printed, digital, and digitized texts are potent vehicles for cultural transmission, preservation, and memory. The advent of 3D printing technologies is the generation of text into a new domain, but it is one as yet little explored or critiqued. In addition to providing opportunities for language revitalization through haptic or kinesthetic learning and dynamic public engagement through makerspace events, our digital handmade research project has the potential to spark new developments in the design and manufacture of multi-dimensionalized digital fonts, particularly given the worldwide revival of letterpress and the book arts. In the wake of the second or industrial age, we can create unique 3D printed typeface on demand, as well as bespoke fonts for InterArt's experimental typography. In making everyday objects like kupu, or words, intriguing again, we can provide a different window on the role of new technologies in reshaping human-machinic interactions. Now, most of the time when we talk about letterpress printing, we might imagine beautifully designed, lovingly produced, handmade books, posters, or ephemera, text typeset by hand with metal or wood types, the compositor inhabiting the mind, if not the inner eye of the writer, visualizing words in space, all set upside down and backwards. Once proofed in galley trays and assembled into chases, these typographic interpretations, creative translations, if you will, are hand-printed using historic platen, treadle platen, or cylinder presses. This intensive process creates a print quality unlike any other. Hand ink relief letter forms are transferred to luscious full-bodied dampened paper through pressure, creating that distinctive deep impulse that ripples when you stroke a page, exemplifying what we call the kiss or the bite of the type, that unique multi-dimensional fingerprint of a centuries-old technology. Hand-bound, often with inventive binding structures, the world of the book becomes a world in itself, honoring the content through a deeply interactive, bodily engaged reading experience. Typesetting depends upon fonts, composed of individual letter forms designed with their express potential in mind. The limited palette of traditional faces such as the Garamons, the Caslons, and the Bedonis became in the 19th century an efflorescence of variegated types in both metal and wood, serif and sans serif, ornamental and funky, to feed the insatiable demand for print across a range of new popular genres. However, the development of linotype, lithography, and photographic reproduction processes threaten the autonomy and livelihood of the trade compositor. In order to compete with these potentially disruptive technologies, printers developed new tools, shared trade secrets, and tried to level the playing field. Experimentation was rife, particularly in the realm of jobbing printing, the bread and butter of the trade. Type was ordinarily set by hand in a composing stick and worked within an unyielding vertical and horizontal layout grid. Diagonals, curves, and other nonlinear designs were a challenge to execute, requiring setting with non-standard spacing to prevent type and ornaments from falling out of the chase. Victorian rule machines enabled more extravagant compositions, and thus even before the Dadaists, the Futurists, or even the concrete poets, the so-called artistic printing movement in the 1880s recalibrated the field, prompting new design vocabularies and fresh aesthetic principles. In predominantly Anglophone settler colonies like New Zealand, Latin-based alphabetic scripts were imported from England and America. Fractions and mathematical symbols satisfied the demands of technical writing, but fonts with Castian accents for foreign language composition were rare, and setting in separate accents on the top of existing letter forms was a logistical nightmare. Given point sizes and type height were not standardized until the end of the 19th century, sorts imported from non-Anglophone countries created many additional practical challenges. Moreover, opportunities for multilingual typesetting were limited. Recruiting compositors fluent in languages other than English was difficult, and printers frequently resorted to setting by visual rote. My 19th century type hero, Robert Coupland-Harding, was a keen linguist as well as typographer, printer, and journalist. He participated in an international exchange network of some 80 multilingual typographical journals and took part in global conversations about reforms in phonography or phonemic orthography, spurred on by developments in Pitman shorthand and Gladstone's diatribes against what he called the national misfortune of English spelling. Coupland-Harding even designed a typecase for a new phonetic alphabet and proposed new forms of writing, calligraphy with the K, as he called it. Harding pretty much bankrupted his business by collecting as many types from around the world as possible. When the government printer needed Greek sorts for an article in the Journal of the Polynesian Society, Harding was able to oblige. Sadly, his collection was dispersed and probably ended up on the scrap metal heap. Like Colenso, Harding had first-hand experience with Te Reo Māori, being a reporter in the native land court and typesetting and printing in Te Reo for his Hawke's Bay Times newspaper. Near the end of his life, he corresponded with book collector Alexander Turnbull about Henry Williams' orthographic experiments, but like Williams, never translated his passion into redesigning and recasting the alphabet. That being said, linotype and monotype casting machines still operate around the world, and the demand for fresh types to replace worn metal in letterpress studios creates a steady, if expensive, market. Auckland-based letterpress printer Michaela Curtis is on a mission. Starting with Colenso's Maori case design, she asked what it would be like if Colenso had had access to macronized vowels. She developed, as you see in the top left of the slide, a case layout that corresponds to both the orthographic patterns of the language and the ergonomic demands of the compositor. She commissioned cast-in macronized vowels for both upper and lower case, and overcame difficulties with baseline alignment in order to set and print this poem by Cilla McQueen. Moreover, she says, as someone who loves printing, is interested in typography, as well as someone who is interested in mark making and the forms of lines, I love, all uppercase, the ampersand. But is it needed in Te Reo Māori? There are so many ways of saying and for different contexts that a single ampersand doesn't really cut it. And the ampersand is also a symbol for a whole word rather than a sound. Michaela's experiments with introducing the macron into the world of traditional metal types for letterpress printing have been a resounding success. Aficionados of traditional wood type often resort to laser cutting end-grain hardwoods or medium-density fiberboard. Whanganui-based Marty Freedy is an award-winning artist and teacher who uses traditional Māori techniques to create harakeke, or forming tenax, or New Zealand flax papers. His printmaking practice explores the darker side of colonization with uncompromisingly incisive and stinging wit. Recent collaborative work that I'm showing here, collaborative work with Joe Giddings, uses his laser-cut wood types. The reduced line height of the capitals accommodates the macron, or the tohutu, and makes typesetting easier, but while this creates a locus of visual interest, it also keeps in play the friction between the reclamation of sound and an orthographic convention that compresses language into someone else's form, thereby diminishing its value. The tohutu, in effect, becomes a site for cultural alienation and restitution, echoing the history of land confiscations that so provocatively permeates Marty's work. Casting in metal and laser cutting in wood are two common practices for the contemporary letterpress artist. Today, 3D printers are as ubiquitous as drones and offer a new take on an old art form. However, rather than extruding yet another Darth Vader figurine or a Lego Batman, Waiteato Press is experimenting with additive manufacturing to generate fonts and invent new hybrid processes and products, and we are not alone. Cambridgeshire-based Print My Part uses this new technology to support traditional printing methods. We can recreate your edited and damaged printing blocks whilst maintaining the identity and design quirk which makes your blocks unique. In 2014, London's New North Press commissioned a new font specifically designed with the 3D printing process in mind. The result was A2 3D, a font whose geometry, as you'll see in the lower right-hand corner, and contemporary wireframe look pins a futuristic flavor onto a 19th century aesthetic. Enter the digital handmade. This is where we do a little nimble flitting from one medium to another, if we're lucky.
For me, the real joy of working in Reimagining Press is what we call living this world of the digital handmade. So it's showing that technology is not actually a sequence of disruptions, but a sequence of continuities. And so that the printed text in my world of lead and wood is not usurped by the sudden advent of 3D printing, the revolution of the digital, but it's all part of a continuity. So what we like to do at Reimagining Press is expose the hybrid nature of those relationships between text technologies, between different time periods, and really see how can you inject a sort of aesthetic dimension into that creative process that you wouldn't be able to get any other way.
It's a foible of our kind of human sense of things that we actually often enjoy or find aesthetically pleasing, that which is not exactly the same every time. So it's often the kind of the quirks or the small intentional aesthetic choices that are made by a craftsperson or an artist that we find the most interesting or engaging. And so in both of these cases, with both the ink printing press and the 3D printing press, I think it's very interesting to challenge people's ideas of what it means to automate a process or to take away the fact that we're not doing it, we're not carving it by hand with a small chisel, for instance. But no less is the artist involved or the craft person involved in both these processes. So not only are we seeing an interplay between old and new, but we're seeing an interplay between kind of tool and craft person, man and machine, if you will. The fact that they are not perfect, but still remain a human process is quite interesting to me.
Our first projects were driven by two practical considerations: to test how successfully 3D printer scanners could capture and clone 19th century wood types, and to create cast-in macrons for typesetting in Terreno Maori. Unlike the subtractive process of traditional hand and machine routing or contemporary laser cutting, 3D printing is an additive manufacturing technique, building up an object layer by layer using, in this instance, heat-fusible plastic wire. In a way, it's almost a version of slow-motion lead-type casting. Materials ranging from wood to metal are now commonplace in 3D printing, and even multi-material and chroma or color printers are being developed. These operate not on the pixel scale, but on the voxel scale, where single voxels, essentially three-dimensional pixels, can be manipulated in multiple ways. The nanoscale is not far behind. So our initial foray, as you saw from the video, into the world of additive manufacture was using the letter N. You'll see from this print that historic wood types are top and bottom, laser cut types are on the left-hand side, and in the middle is the 3D printed letter form. Laser types tend to lose the dynamism and verve of wood types with their distressed look and traces of wood grain. But what really blew us away was the surface texture of the 3D printed sort. It had nothing to do with the computer programmer who created the file to be printed, and everything to do with the machine itself. The chatter you can see in the middle is the printer throwing a bit of a wobbly, having a bad hair day, unhappy with the temperature or humidity, or the wind velocity outside, of which we have much in Wellington. We can't control it and may never be able to replicate it, but it has a unique identity that for us is the DNA or fingerprint of the machine expressing itself on the face of the letter. Although our director of IT asked if we could burnish the plastic on the face to create a perfect flat, that wasn't the point. We'd stumbled upon a new kind of manufacturing process for floriated initials, those lovely ornamented capital letters from the 18th and 19th century used to begin a chapter or paragraph. We extended the adventure and tried logotypes, those blocks of letters forming words. Our technical lead, Andre Houdenhouse, used his default Linux sans serif face, but in order to render curves for the CAD file output, he had to pre-select random points on the letter O. We joked about the idiosyncrasies of his ugly O, but it's grown on us over time. Retro was trotted out for a first-year orientation and makerspace event. Our 1894 tabletop platen press competed for attention with an Oculus Rift and won out every single time. We often forget that old technology is new technology for our students. They're curious about an anthropomorphic machine with which they can produce a physical object using type whose materiality they can both see and feel. Now, once he saw our N and Retro, Leo Browning, who was in the video, he's a PhD candidate at Victoria's McDermott Nanotechnology Institute, became really excited about the possibility of playing with surface textures. As he noted, the expectation with 3D printing, it's an easy way to make a computer-perfect physical object. But the reality is you often see the way the plastic is being extruded from the machine. The mark of the machine or its fingerprint is apparent when the type is used on a letterpress. So I built something that gave the 3D printer instructions on the type texture I wanted. The result was a combination of intended pattern as well as the 3D printer's own quirks and foibles. Riffing on the theme of handmade, Leo used his home-built 3D printer, and in order to cut down on the production time of logotypes, which could take anything from 4 to 6 hours to get them each to standardized type height of 0.9181 of an inch, he trialed creating flat plastic slips with the merest hint of relief. These are challenging to print, but not impossible. In fact, in the process, Leo became fascinated by how the machine constructs the spaces around the letter forms. Next up is a project to reverse out both the letters and the relief, so we can print the backgrounds and see what navigation trail the machine leaves behind, potentially altering the machine's speed to create different nodes of visual interest. We'd already considered the option of 3D printing to resolve the macron issue, but other questions remain. Can we manufacture types at 12 to 14 pointers and finer? Can we engineer through resin casting or other 3D methods, rather than plane down the types, to create a smooth face? What results do we get when we print with different additive manufacturing processes and single or composite materials? So in short, how can we extend our repertoire of analog printing techniques to create something that is more than the sum of its component parts? As Leo says, I've come away with a commitment to celebrating the imperfections and character we produce. Not only are we seeing the interplay, they've rolled anew, but an interplay between tool and craftsperson, man and machine. The fact they're not perfect, but remain a human process is fascinating. Last month, Waitiata Press team collaborated with Maori typographer and designer Johnson Witakira Napui Natihinekura for a mini-residency and exhibition at Wellington's Enjoy Gallery. Whakarare, named after a traditional Maori carved pattern and meaning to confuse or distort, was a font Johnson developed to embody what it means to be Maori. He said the wero, the challenge, was to create the first by Maori, for Maori typeface. A typeface that reaffirms Maori ideas about the world, te ao Maori, and stakes a claim to the printed page. His objectives were twofold: to use customary Maori knowledge as a source of inspiration for contemporary Maori design, and to employ Maori typography as a means of cultural resistance through engagement with post-colonial discourse. Whakarare, he says, is built from the ground up, with the focus being on the creation of wholly new forms. Thus, while referencing Maori aesthetics and studies of Maori typographic preferences, each letter was created from hand-drawn originals, using high contrast between strokes, an emphasis on the vertical stress, and the use of an irregularly high X height. The use of macrons to indicate long vowels was also an important aspect of the typeface. Unquote. Johnson supplies vectorized files, which Leo 3D printed. Then my assistants Yawen Ho and Meredith Patterson undertook some analog experiments. The idea was not to imitate the digital, but to reveal how shifting the technological register could extend the repertoire of practical and aesthetic possibilities. Here's a close-up of how the additive manufacturing process creatively these stereotypes. Under the microscope, the extraterrestrial landscape is compelling. In printing the blocks, we translated shadow and inline features by repetition and offset, added dimensionality through split phantom rolls, and although the compression ratios of this type of plastic impact upon the depth of bite or impression, trialing a range of papers of different bulk and thicknesses and fiber stretched the options. We were also concerned that Johnson might expect to see his letter forms perfectly rendered in analog print, but were delighted with his positive reaction to the dance of light, shadow, and texture. Designing typefaces specifically for Tereo is not new. Samoan-born graphic designer Joseph Churchward hand-lettered over 650 fonts, including Churchward Maori from 1983, that evokes traditional koru and kowhaiwhai patterns. Straddling pre- and post-colonial worlds, this font at one point was thought suitable for all black jerseys. Churchward also tackled the Tohutu, and in 2009 collaborated with his biographer David Benowith to create a multi-headed hydra of an ampersand fondly known as King Rat. In a different register, Ian James turned away from the Roman alphabet completely to produce a syllabic form that is phonetically coherent and internally consistent. He said part of the aim was to suggest a formal or a sacred alphabet for the recording of special poems and songs, while maintaining a local aesthetic in the visual form. New Maori does not offer benefits of efficiency, simply those of cultural identity. And his macron visually translates the doubled vowels to repeated koru, or unfurling fern marks. Wellington artist, photographer, and filmmaker Partington, Katahu, teamed up with Aaron McCurdy and George Clark to develop this hauntingly provocative Parihaka font, which also featured in our exhibition last month. Based on hand-painted lettering on the walls of Maori marae, which were in turn a memorial vestige of letter forms in printed Maori Bibles and Nupepa Maori newspapers, Parihaka was devised for an exhibition and book that explored the art of passive resistance, a troubling chapter of Aotearoa's colonial history that's still being lived in the present. As Cheryl Bernstein notes, quote, I think it's one of the most important examples of New Zealand graphic design produced in recent years, utterly distinctive, at once elegant and engagingly awkward, informal yet painstaking. It speaks of the shared history of Aotearoa New Zealand while resisting categorization as an antique aesthetic, neither historical nor modern, but something else again. The Parihaka font is essentially a hybrid, a coming together of diverse cultures and technologies. Unquote. By reimagining the Parihaka font through additive manufacture and analog printing, the conjunction of the digital and handmade has created a fresh and unexpected form of typographic expression. Waitiata Press has also been experimenting with 3D and analog printing as a way of exploring complex multicultural hyphenated identities. Given, as I'd mentioned earlier, the press is home to New Zealand's only collection of full-form classical Chinese types, additive manufacturing combined with modular design may be a way of replicating worn-out types, but also experimenting with new fusion fonts that exemplify contemporary identity politics. Yawen Ho, our type curator, is a Taiwanese-born and Auckland-raised poet and artist who designed the font on the left-hand side. It's both a linguistic translation of a famous drinking song by the 8th century poet Levi, and a visual pun with the English letters of the translation recomposed as word assemblages, a key feature in the construction of Chinese characters. You might be able to distinguish a the there periodically, and definitely an I, maybe even drinking if you're looking cross-eyed. Furthermore, Yawen took two characters, as you see in the lower right-hand corner, and asked Leo to print them as organic shapes rather than rectilinear blocks. This meant she could nest the blocks together and use some late 19th century trade tricks to print them. 3D printing may also help resolve the eternal conundrum of Persian calligraphy. This interarts form emphasizes the indissoluble relationship between music, dance, and literature, a link between sound, frayed by the exigencies of technologies like letterpress printing, which were not universally adopted, particularly in non-Western contexts. This interest in modularity for us is shared with Québécois artist Judith Poirier. Based at UQAM, the Université de Québec, Montréal, Judith has spent a number of years working with the Inuit syllabary, which, like Maori, is deeply rooted in the legacy of European colonization. Along with Cree and other First Nations writing systems, these scripts were devised from Pitman's shorthand and Indic Devanagari, and first popularized through the newly invented Cherokee printed language. Judith's project Latitude brings together linguists, graphic designers, historians, and letterpress printers, as well as a language revitalization group committed to a unified Inuktitut script drawn from the 4 Inuit regions of northern Canada. Using 85 laser-cut wood components in a sans serif condensed font developed specifically for the project, she can nimbly typeset and print in Inuktitut, but as well in English and in French, thus reflecting the reality of interpenetrating cultures in Nunavut today. My final 2 examples explore the intersection of the digital and the handmade in the world of generative computer art. Inspired by the Aleppo movement of the 1960s, Bill Seaman coined the term recombinant poetics in 1995 in order to define a particular approach to emergent meaning that is used in generative virtual environments. Based upon a set of mathematical constraints to liberate the imagination and playful interactions, recombinant poetics foregrounds the relationship between man and machine. Quote, all generative art focuses on the process by which an artwork is made, and this process is required to have a degree of autonomy and independence from the artist who defines it. This degree of autonomy and independence assigned to the computer varies significantly, from works that seek to minimize or exclude the creative signature of the human designer completely, to those in which the computer's role is more passive and the human artist has created primary creative responsibility and autonomy. This delicate balancing act between the artist and computer underpins our literary atlas of Wellington, launched at the New Zealand Writers and Readers Festival earlier this year. This interdisciplinary digital humanities project was developed by School of Design students Jonah Bishop, Jeff Jones, Seth Paz, and Tom Chang, plus School of Film graduate Monique Thorpe. The smartphone app enables users to walk to locations along the Wellington waterfront and download information about well-known writers triggered by the location of typographical sculptures comprising the Wellington Writers' Walk. Through a combination of GPS geolocation tracking and AR augmented reality, Victoria University of Wellington's library digital collections are integrated into the user's physical space, making the visual, textual, and audio content interactive for public consumption. In addition to on-site kinetic typography performances, visitors to each site can create their own found poem by lassoing, dragging, dropping selected writer's words into a 140-character tweet that is automatically published on social media and on our project site. The end game is an immersive experience that embeds letterpress into the process. And now we try this again. straddle the worlds of the ancient and modern. What excites me about working in White Press is that idea of words in space. Most people tend to think of print as something that's sitting in a book, on a poster, it's fixed, it's solid, it's repeatable, etc. But it's also things like augmented reality. If someone's walking on the waterfront and they whip out their smartphone and suddenly they're within a cooey of this particular installation, they initialize it with a GPS and they say, wow, here I'm looking at this bit of poetry. When you're interpreting the poem, when you're trying to make sense of it, you're actually in a position where you're creating new meaning for you. With your smartphone in hand, you could take a look at the writing, you could drag and drop some of the words, and you could create a new piece of text. In effect, a newfound poem. And that newfound poem, if you tweet it out, then it becomes part of the world, and it goes public. You'll be able to see everybody else's interpretation of that poem. So creating, in effect, a tweet roll of all the writing that people have interacted with. It's really part of that digital handmade concept that we're trying to promote here at White Press, and trying to enable people to think that rather than digital is along and print is dead, it's actually the combination of the two that can make for new ways of thinking about how we communicate with people and how we interact with the world around us. I'm just going to close out just in case it does something else. Another project crafted at Waitiata Press that combines digital and analog is, in potentially surprising ways, is Unexpected Connections. This digital artwork was produced in conjunction with an exhibition of the same name in 2016 and 17 at the Alexander Turnbull Gallery at the National Library of New Zealand. It composes multi-layered images randomly drawn from a curated collection of some 300 digitized objects, and complemented the physical exhibition by suggesting, if not exposing, how serendipitous links between objects can be assembled to create beautiful artworks and evocative palimpsests that have the potential to reveal new connections and tell new stories. Unexpected Connections is based upon Australian academic printmaker and creative coder Mitchell Whitelaw's interactive work, Succession, Digital Fossils for an Industrial Age. As Whitelaw notes, quote, Succession generates digital fossils from images documenting the history of Newcastle at one time. Each one is unique, generated by selecting items at random from a set of about 2,000. The term succession is borrowed from ecology, where it refers to the way living systems create the conditions for their own future changes. The question for industrial capitalism is, what next? This work reveals layers of our shared heritage, rearranging and compressing them to seek out new meanings and latent stories. Our industrial culture is founded on coal, a fossil fuel, a compressed residue made from the dead bodies of ancient plants and animals. Succession, in turn, produces visual fossils, compressed energy to refuel reflection on the past and speculation on the future. Our installation, reinterpreted and localized by Waitiata Press's technical lead, software engineer Rhys Owen, uses a randomized search algorithm to draw down visual assets related to William Colenso from Digital New Zealand sets, whether they be maps, photographs, manuscripts, artworks, newspapers, or other printed material. Through a sequence of creative code, the interface reassembles them into a suite of 5 transparent overlays, randomly, again, resized, cropped, repeated to evoke the geology, if not the paleontology, of the archival research enterprise, affording opportunities to turn chance into unexpected connections. In the full web-delivered version, each object can be investigated further through metadata hyperlinks to the original collecting institution. And in future, images will also be able to be saved, curated, and shared. Now, being a letterpress printer, My next task is to output each of these individual digital images into 3D printed plates and hand print them. Each plate can be thematically color-coded, registered, overprinted with the next, layering the digital assets to create a multi-dimensional visual landscape or virtual world that, because of the affordances of letterpress, has length, width, and depth created by the kiss or bite of the type into the malleable flesh of the dampened paper. Moreover, since each plate now exhibits flats and grooves, it can become the locus for sonic engagement, data sonification, in other words. Colenso the musical is next up on our research agenda. By reverse engineering a digital generative artwork through analog printing, we aim to create new cultural heritage objects that further blur the distinction between physical and digital materiality. Furthermore, by exploring the relationship between serendipity and palimpsest, these new digital handmade artifacts expose the logic of constructedness of the past, its archive, and its users. So to conclude, I'd like to return to Johnson Rutteriera's twin provocations. Can a typeface be a place of tino rangatanitana, self-determination? And can a Māori typeface be used to reclaim the printed page in which our indigenous knowledge is captured? For Māori designers, connecting typography to cosmology and Māori narratives about the arts is the natural consequence of design from a Māori worldview. The tohutu or macron is but one visual artifact of a complex process of cultural reappropriation and identity politics. Later this year, student scholarships are on offer for the first time in New Zealand for research into Māori fonts. Perceptions of Māori typographic design and use is part of the nationwide Te Reo Revitalisation project. Research that will provide the first empirical insights into how a typeface use impacts readers' perceptions of the information or product on which Te Reo Māori text is used. What are the features of a Māori typeface? What are the attributes of Māori typography? And what kinds of advice do designers need to create new, culturally embedded Māori fonts? Johnson is well on his way to producing a distinctive Māori voice in typography and introducing it into the contemporary reality of bicultural engagement. His award-winning alphabet blocks are helping to teach Te Reo to our tamariki. Moreover, the return to orality is being investigated through a brace of activities. The digitization of crowdsourced Te Reo to inform a Siri or Alexa voice-actuated artificial intelligence environment. A Māori pronunciation app that's just been released, and a Māori phonetic dictionary that's in the works. At Waitiata Press, we like to think our excursion into the world of the digital handmade has wider social, political, and cultural implications. The 3D macronization of Māori and the development of new hybrid fonts can assist language revitalization as well as renewed understandings of globalization and multiculturalism. By reimagining 19th century printing history, we are not only inventing a new aesthetic, but directly implicated in a timely process of decolonization. Let the type speak. Kia ora rawa atu ngā mihi nui. Kia ora tata.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Sydney, for a wonderful paper. Let's open it up to questions before I monopolize all your time with my own questions. Do you want to jump in?
Sydney, thank you for incredibly, that's such a stimulating and interesting presentation. You brought in so many strands. I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of the kind of practical implications or issues, for example, about the kind of the restriction of consonants in Maori and what implications that had effectively in terms of reuse of type in the 19th century and beyond that. I'm assuming that type was simply adopted wholesale from existing Latin character sets, and so presumably there were actually letters that were literally worn out more quickly than others, and for a start the 5 vowels, and the consonants that were chosen for Maori. So I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about that and perhaps the kind of economic or cultural implications of that restriction on the kind of character set.
I guess, first up is a restriction by comparison to the Latin alphabet, but not and it is a restriction by which that was able to evoke and embrace the sound of the language. So those are the two restrictions. But there's two wonderful anecdotes from the world of William Colenso. The first one was that, in theory, he was hired to typeset and print the New Testament in Maori. And therefore, when he arrived and the print shop was set up, not only did he have a whole bunch of things that hadn't been ordered and had to improvise, including the type cases, but at least he had type in all the Latin alphabet forms. But he only created a case for typesetting in Maori, which meant any time he had to set material on behalf of the government in the English language, he had all these squibs of paper all around the print shop and try and find and then make some sense of it. For a number of years, he was making a pretty good go of it, trying to typeset in the two languages with these two versions of case design. And the second anecdote is related to the use, if not overuse, of the characters. You're 30,000 miles away and you can't exactly get type recast, so you had to constantly bring it across and make a case more specifically to the Church Missionary Society that your linguistic enterprise was successful, that you were converting the Maori, and that you were teaching them to read the Maori language in print. And so the Missionary Register overinflates all the time the success of the colonial enterprise in order to keep the idea of constant funding to this mission in New Zealand alive, where it was being cut off in other places. But at one point, Colenso had problems because he started running out of H's. And he had to end up on the model of what Henry Williams did with the G, having to file the bottom of G's to create an H so he could still use it. And when he ran out of B's, who knows what he did. But he was pretty creative when it came to overcoming some of the obstacles. But it was still a very lame kind of approach to the language. And because the orthography hadn't been regularized, and because umlauts usually weren't around, and you had doubling of the vowels, so you had to use twice as many vowels, and you expected the Maori people you were teaching the language to continue using it in that form, which of course they didn't. It was a constant battle for that linguistic space. The mechanical, the practical problems weren't solved to the 1980s. But that meant a very long and extended process of linguistic colonization that, as we see, has its impact today. Yeah, Edmund.
Yeah, I guess just following on from that and kind of thinking about the move toward 3D printed type, I was wondering if you've kind of had any experience with what the kind of wear patterns are with that, what the life cycle of those type pieces are, whether they're kind of analogous to kind of traditional type or different, and I guess some of the ecological implications as well of using